The Ope Ope no Mi is undoubtedly one of One Piece's most powerful devil fruits, and that's saying a lot considering just how many fruits there exists. Today's video asks the question of what would happen if Izuku Midoriya was to eat said fruit and gain its powers. How would this affect the My Hero Academia universe? Well, stick around to find out. Also, the beginning of the video was heavily inspired by an online author whose link you can find down below. And if you're interested in more My Hero Academia X One Piece content, I have tons more of it, so go check them out after watching this video. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start our story in the perspective of Inko wishing that somebody comes and saves her son. See, her and Izuku were at the shopping mall district, and while they were there, a bomb ended up going off, which Izuku jumped in the way to protect his mother for. Sadly, he ended up getting injured and lost a lot of blood, and Inko's now waiting for a blood transfusion from anybody, because she tried, but she wasn't a match. She was gonna pray for somebody, anybody to save her son, and suddenly, she could hear her name be called. She lifted her head and saw a young man stare down at her. He was a slim man, essentially Law, and it's basically just a description of what he looks like, talking about his dark hair, his obscured eyes, his sideburns, and his small goatee. She would notice that he was wearing an all-black hoodie which had yellow smile facing in the center, and the other thing she noticed was the tattoo on both sides of his hands. What stood out though was the fact that it spelled death. Standing next to him was a tall white polar bear wearing an orange jumpsuit, carrying a cooler in his hands. Who was this man? Ah, yes, she finally replied after observing him for so long. Who are you? The man replied, Trafalgar Law. I heard your son needed a blood transfusion, and I volunteered to give him some of mine. Really? She grabbed both arms, hoping this wasn't a dream. Yeah, when I looked at your son's chart, I noticed we had the same blood type, and volunteered to give him some of mine, even though those idiots told me not to, Law said dryly. Inko let go of him and bowed. Please, please save my Izuku. Law stared at her, bowing. I plan on it, he told her as he would walk past her and he would go towards the ICU room. The white bear turned to the woman before going inside to the ICU, and he would turn to her saying, don't worry, Captain knows what he's doing, since he's a doctor, the white bear told her before following Law. Inko would stood there as she processed what had just happened, and the bear saying that that man was a surgeon? Certainly didn't look like one, but even so, he promised to save her son no matter what. So, she'll have faith in her skills. I mean his skills, my bad. Please, please save my Izuku. Inside the intensive care unit, Law would stare down at the boy, seeing the various wires and bandages all over him covered in blood. The kid was a mess. It was a wonder he was even alive to begin with, especially since he didn't have a quirk as they call it here. When they first arrived here by the port, he decided to see how the medical stuff here works. Whatever Straw Hat and the rest of the crew did on their own free time was no business of his. Truth be told, he didn't even get permission from anyone to be in here, but when he heard a kid was sent to the ICU, his curiosity got the better of him. According to the kid's records, he was what they call a quirkless kid, meaning without a quirk. From what he gathered, people without quirks here are seen at the bottom of the food chain, and this kid is no different. But there was something else that interested him about quirks. You can transfer a quirk through various methods, as long as the person has the DNA of the individual. Giving the kid some of his blood won't do anything, so he'll give the kid some of his DNA and see what happens. But he had to say, he was impressed the kid was still alive after everything. Captain! Law smirked, interesting. Oh wait, Law smirked. Interesting. This kid should be dead, but he's hanging in there, albeit by a thread anyway. The white bear looked at Izuku. Are you sure about giving your own blood to him, Captain? Yeah, just giving this kid some of my blood won't be enough, so I'll transfer some DNA to him. I'm kinda interested to see if this kid'll stay quirkless, or gain the same powers as me. Law smirked. Bet'll surprise the hell out of him, right, Beppo? Beppo nodded. Yes, Captain. Law rolled up his sleeves and said, let's get started then. He then felt something grip his jacket and was shocked to see it was the kid. Gray eyes looked on to green ones. There was something about that look the kid was giving him that made him think about himself for a minute. "Captain!" Law ignored Beppo and kept his gaze on the kid. "You want to live, right?" A grip was his response, as well as ragged breathing. He snorted. Yeah, this kid was interesting. He smirked. Time to operate. And that is essentially how the quirkless boy would go on to meet Shino Gekai, the surgeon of death. Whether their meeting was fated or a coincidence, that's unknown. But 3 months would pass, and after the bombing incident and Izuku's surgery was done at the hands of Trafalgar Law, Enko was so grateful to the man that she insisted on inviting him to dinner as a thank you for saving her son's life. Though Law protested, he eventually gave in, knowing the woman wouldn't stop pestering him until he said yes, after the kid got out of the hospital about 4 days later. Inko practically dragged both Law and Beppo to their house to eat with them. Izuku had taken an instant liking to both Law and Beppo. Beppo, proven by how the green-haired boy would climb on the white bear's back and play with his ears. Beppo took it like a champ though and never once complained. Law chatted with Inko while Izuku played with Beppo in the living room. The gray-eyed captain would often eye Izuku, waiting to see if the kid would awaken the same power as him. And after giving the kid some of his blood, he waited for him to heal so he could give the kid some of his DNA. As gross as it sounds, the only thing he could think of was to yank some of his own hair out and put it into the kid's soup when he wasn't looking. The kid ate all of it, and Law noticed the hair wasn't in his bowl, meaning it was already inside his body. All he had to do now was wait, but then again, there was no guarantee that it would work. Not even 2 weeks later, when he met up with the mother again and she yanked him inside the house, did he finally get the results he wanted. Once he stepped into the living room, he saw it. It was covered in a blue circle. He couldn't help the smirk that appeared in his face. Guess it worked after all. In the end, the gamble paid off. Things just got more interesting. Inko and Izuku sat down on the couch as he explained to them what was going on with the kid and to help cancel room. So, it's not a quirk? Inko questioned. No. Instead of calling it a quirk, it's more like a devil fruit power, Law told her. It's stronger than quirks. Stronger? Izuku blinked. Law looked at Izuku. Yeah, where we come from, there's no such thing as quirks, only devil fruits. Mine's called the Ope Ope no Mi. In translation, it means operation. Inko leaned forward. These devil fruits have different abilities, and giving these abilities to the users who eat them, she didn't like what it was called. Devil fruit? First of all things, but she ignored it in favor of wanting to know what effects it would have on her son. Basically, since I gave the kid some of his DNA, now he has the same powers as I do. That blue spear you saw is called what I like to call Room. He explained, and Inko asked, what does it do? It allows me to create a spherical space around a target, he began to explain. Like me, he can control whatever's going on inside the circle. Hell, he can even make it as big as he wants, but it takes more concentration. Izuku stared down at his hands in awe. He didn't care that the power wasn't a quirk and instead a devil fruit ability. An ability given to him by the very same man who saved his life. Law stared at the boy who was either lost in thought or was admiring the fact that he now had powers like everybody else. Truth be told, he was still surprised. His gamble would showed any progress at all, but he wasn't the only one to deny what was in front of him. Needless to say, Law got the results he wanted, so he wasn't complaining. I have a request, Law-san. He raised a brow. Law-san? What? She bowed. Please train my son. There was a moment of silence. Wait, what? Ha! She raised her head. I don't want Izuku to suddenly lose control, or for him to accidentally hurt someone. Please. His eyebrow twitched at the sudden request. This seems like something the Straw Hat would get himself into, not him in those eyes. The eyes the kid was giving him was making it very hard to say no. The real question was why he couldn't just say no. Damn it. With a sigh, he leant back onto the couch. Fine. And just like that, he unwillingly decided to train the kid. Law rubbed the bridge of his nose as Luffy kept grinning like an idiot. Like always, and the other crew members were just being themselves. The kid was currently hiding behind him, because he caught a glimpse of Brook and promptly hid behind Law, but peeked his head out a little as a sign of shyness. "You started kidnapping kids now?" Zoro questioned, raising an eyebrow. A tick mark appeared on Law's head. "No, I was asked to teach the brat." "Teach him?" Sanji questioned, puffing out some smoke from his cigarette. "What are you going to teach him?" Usopp was confused as to why anyone would ask Law of all people to teach a small kid anything. Law grunted out a response. "The brat's mother asked me to teach him." He gave them a serious look. "Because he has the same powers as me." Silence grew and took over the entire area. Izuku could have laughed at the expression some of them were making, but he was still shy to act on such an impulse. "What? How?" Nami was the one to ask. Law brought the kid forward but kept both hands on the boy's shoulders. "The brat was involved in that terrorist attack. The one that was all over the news?" Usopp questioned. "After the Straw Hats came here and realized people get their news from TV, they saw the terrorist attack on the news while watching it on a mini TV that Nami got from somewhere. They didn't ask how she paid for it though, if she did it all. Yes, there was a report that some people didn't make it, and only one person was in critical condition, Robin told them. The critical patient wasn't named, but it was reported that it was a child." Brook looked at Izuku. So, he was the only one they were talking about. "The poor boy. But he looks okay now," Chopper pointed out. "So that means Law must have done something. But what did he do to cause him to have the same devil fruit powers as him?" Law answered that for him, he needed a blood transfusion because he lost a lot of it. "I looked at the kid's files and found out he was classified as quirkless, so I gave him some of my DNA to see if he'd get the same abilities as me." Robin put a finger to her chin. "Interesting. So the properties of this world affects us despite us not originally being here." "What does that mean?" Usopp questioned. Robin elaborated. We are what's known as new element in this world. And because of that, this world sought to correct that by making sure we became affected by its properties here." Chopper were staring to get it. "So you mean because we're now affected by the properties here, that means if Robin, me, Luffy, and Brook can transfer some of our DNA to anyone here, they'll gain the same powers as us?" "Yes," Robin nodded. "While it's impossible for something like that to happen in our world, it's possible here." Usopp groaned. "The whole thing's giving me a headache." She. "It's fine, isn't it?" Luffy grinned. "If Law says everything's okay, then it's fine." Nami and Usopp sighed, but otherwise said nothing as Izuku looked over at all the crew members and gave them a light, I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet all of you." Luffy grinned. "Monkey D. Luffy. Nice to meet you. My name's Nami." Nami introduced herself next. "My name's Chopper." Chopper smiled. "I'm Usopp, the king of snipers." Usopp introduced himself dramatically. "Nico Robin," introduced herself with a smile. Sanji took another puff from his cigarette and said, "Name's Sanji." Zoro crossed his arms. "Roronoa Zoro. But you can just call him Marimo." Sanji smirked. Next thing Izuku knew, the two of them were going at it, making him sweat drop, especially since Luffy was laughing at them. "Yo ho ho ho! Pleasure to meet you, young man. That was so bad. That was so bad. Yo ho 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 ho!" Yeah, that's how I should have done it. I'm dumb, but anyways, my name's Brook, and if you don't mind, there's something I wish to ask of you. Izuku was still a little scared of Brook, but answered anyway. "Sure." Brook walked over to him and bent down a little. "May I please borrow some money?" He was promptly kicked away by Nami. "Don't ask a little kid for money," she yelled. Izuku blinked a few times. "Just what's wrong with these people?" "The name's Frankie. It's super nice to meet you." Frankie did his trademark pose as he greeted Izuku. Izuku's eyes sparkled as he glared at Frankie. "A cyborg!" Frankie gave him a thumbs up. Law walked past Izuku, getting his attention. "Oi, Sanji, Zoro. You'll be training the kid too." Sanji and Zoro stopped their momentary brawl, looking at Law as though he had lost his mind. "Huh?" Izuku was surprised too. They were also going to be his teachers? "He can't just know how to use the Ope Ope no Mi," Law stated. "He needs to learn how to fight." Frankie expected Izuku. The kid does have skinny arms. "Well, he's a kid," Usopp deadpanned. Izuku bowed politely to them again. "Please, take good care of me." Zoro clicked his tongue. Why do we have to teach some Gaki?" Luffy jumped down from his perch on the Thousand Sunny. "Come on, Zoro, it'll be fun." "Fine." Zoro stared down at the boy, making the boy scared a little, but kept his gaze. I'll turn you into a beast. Be prepared, Gaki. Hi, Zoro-sensei, Izuku said, giving him a determined look. Zoro smirked at Sanji, who gave him a certain look before turning to Izuku. Listen, kid, being a beast is good and all, however. Being a gentleman with the ladies is far better. Izuku started mumbling, much to Law's ire, but otherwise said nothing. I'll do my best, Sanji-sensei. Don't brainwash the Gaki, arrow cook, Zoro exclaimed. What was that, Murimo? Sanji shot back. Izuku then started to laugh at their antics, no longer feeling afraid, while Law meanwhile looked annoyed, but that was nothing new. That's just how the Straw Hats are. Keep going at it, Gaki, Zoro yelled. Izuku grunted as he kept pushing himself to running the 30-minute lap Zoro made him do. For the first part of his training, Izuku had to strengthen his body, and who better to do that than Zoro himself? It took Izuku 2 minutes to realize that Zoro can be a real sadist. First, Zoro made him do 30 push-ups, 30 sit-ups, and now 30 laps. Izuku nearly passed out a few times, but hung in there and refused to give up. He was told at school multiple times that he would forever be a Deku, meaning unable to do anything by Kacchan. But that changes now. He trained and worked on his devil fruit powers and strengthening his body in order to protect those he cares about. When he reached the last lap, he fell to his knees, his breath heavy with sweat pouring down his face. His arms and legs felt heavy, but there was a sense of achievement he'd never felt before, so he would ignore his sore arms and legs and keep pushing forward. A water bottle landed before him, and he looked up to see it was Zoro-sensei who tossed it over with a grin. Not bad, he complimented. Somehow Izuku managed to give the man a grin and even speak. Thank you, Zoro-sensei. He thanked, taking the water bottle and chugging it down hungrily. Chopper then showed up. Now make sure you eat something too after you work out, then take a bath. Izuku finished guzzling down the water bottle and then nodded. Hi! Oi! Dinner's ready! Sanji's voice rung out to everyone. Dinner! Luffy's voice was loud and clear. Izuku stood up slowly as he walked towards the kitchen with Chopper following right behind him, just in case he fell over. Zoro, meanwhile, stood there impressed by the kid's mental discipline. Usually kids his age would be whining and complaining about every damn thing, but not this one. It actually made him was to keep training the kid more. The green-haired boy saw the good-looking food in front of him and forced himself not to drool. He clasped his hands together, Itadakimasu, taking his first bite as he made a humming sound before he kept eating with a smile on his face. Now look, boys, before y'all roast me down below in the comments, just know I don't usually read fanfics, and I'm not exactly the best reader, okay? Like, I barely graduated, okay? So get off my back. But if you do gotta roast me and it's funny enough, then I'll pin your comment. That said, is it good? Brooke asked. Izuku nodded happily, not feeling scared of Brooke anymore. Instead, finding the skeleton man funny. A little perverted, but funny. Robin giggled. He's such an honest boy. He'll grow up to be quite the heartbreaker whenever he gets older, Nami said. Hopefully he won't be a pervert. Robin giggled. Luffy was stuffing his face as usual, along with Usopp, Chopper, and everyone else. This is when Chopper would go on to ask Izuku how he was feeling, and the boy told him he was a little sore. Law and Beppo were eating with them too, but had more manners than the rest of the Straw Hats when it came to eating. How's the training with Marimo coming along, kid? Sanji asked. Izuku swallowed his food before answering. Really good, Sanji-sensei. Yo ho ho ho. Make sure you don't hurt yourself too much, Brooke told him. Law finished his drink. Take a shower after you finish eating. You'll be working with me next. Izuku gave him a determined look. Hi. Nami swooned and hugged the boy. You're just so cute. Sanji and Brooke were taken back by the sudden hug attack by Nami and got a bit jealous, wishing they were the ones being hugged. We're cute too, Nami-san, Sanji and Brooke wailed. Izuku blinked that he was being hugged by Nami but didn't think about it much and hugged the woman back with a smile. Nami, Nissan is pretty. Robin, Nissan too. Kya, Nami squealed and hugged him more. You're just so adorable. How sweet, Robin smiled. Sanji and Brooke had to give the kid some credit. When it comes to older woman, he played the charm on well. Smart brat. Law stared down at Izuku. You ready, brat? Izuku nodded. Law didn't waste any time as he started to get started. Room. A blue circle surrounded them. You already know about this. Like I explained before, I can make this circle smaller or bigger if I choose. He made the circle disappear. Your turn. Izuku took a deep breath before copying Law. Room. The same circle appeared and covered the two of them, but Law spotted a difference. slightly smaller than mine, Law observed. We'll be working on that. Hi, Law-sensei, Izuku said. Don't call me that, Law told him. Law-san? The boy tilted his head. Law made a face and decided to just let the kid call him whatever he liked. The rest of the Straw Hats were watching them. That's so cute, Nami smiled. Law seems like the type that would be good with kids. Really? He seemed like the last person that would get along with a kid, Usopp said, sounding doubtful. Then, they say the same thing about these two. Nami gestured over towards Zoro and Sanji. Zoro gave her a face. Speaking of which, did you really have to make the kid do 30 push-ups, sit-ups, and laps? Usopp questioned. Zoro crossed his arms. That was just a warm-up. Tomorrow the kid will do 100. Are you trying to kill him? Usopp, Nami, and Chopper explained. Luffy simply laughed. Izuku wasn't paying attention to them, instead focusing on what Law was saying and telling him. He promised to get stronger and become a hero that protects people with a smile on his face. Just like All Might. That's chapter 1 for you people, and I think I'm actually going to cover a little bit of the second chapter, just to give you guys a little bit more content. That said, chapter 2, A Child's Desire. Izuku spent his days after school with Law and the Straw Hat Pirates. His training was going well too. He would train with Zoro Sensei first, then Sanji Sensei, and lastly Law. He kept training with his powers. Law Sensei told him both the strengths and weaknesses of the Ope Ope no Mi, which he made sure to write it all down so he wouldn't forget. The time he would spend with the Straw Hat Pirates, including Law Sensei, was the best thing that happened in his life. The terrorist attack wasn't something he liked to look back and remember about, but it allowed him to meet Law Sensei and the others too, even becoming a Devil Fruit user. He wondered why they were called Devil Fruit users and reminded himself to ask Law Sensei about it later. Today's training was different. After Izuku witnessed Zoro practice his swordsmanship, he was entranced and couldn't look away. The green-haired man noticed the boy staring at him and saw the same spark that he had when he first learned swordsmanship. Instead of letting Izuku practice with a real sword, he gave him a wooden sword in order to avoid getting hit by Nami and for teaching the kid bad habits. Yeah, right. So, here Izuku was now, practicing with his wooden sword with his shirt off. Zoro told him to take his shirt off before he started practicing. He didn't question it, just did as he was told. He was so focused he almost didn't hear Chopper's gasp, making him jump slightly, having not expected it. Izuku, what happened to your arm? Chopper asked, freaking out. Izuku was confused at first until he finally understood what made Chopper freak out. He was referring to the birthmark Kachan gave him a long time ago. His mother asked him the same question but couldn't bring himself to answer her. Now Chopper was asking him, and he didn't know whether he should answer or just tell him to leave it alone. But he couldn't bring himself to do that. Kachan did that, Izuku confessed. Chopper gave him a horrified look. Your mother did that to you? Unfortunately, the little reindeer mistook words for Kachan for Ka-chan. Honest mistake. No, mommy didn't do this to me. Mommy's quirk lets her move things, Izuku corrected quickly. Kachan's my best friend. He gave me this. Oh, Chopper breathed a sigh of relief, which was soon replaced by horror. Wait, your best friend did this to you? On purpose? Izuku gave him a small nod. Kachan got his own quirk before me, but he uses it on me all the time. He calls me a Deku too. What does Deku mean? Chopper asked. The green-haired child looked down in shame. It means useless. Well, that settled it. Chopper officially hated this Kachan person and decided to tell Izuku about his feelings. Then he's not your friend, Chopper yelled. Izuku flinched at the sudden loudness, but he was more shocked when Chopper started to yell. Real friends don't hurt each other. That Kachan person isn't really your friend if he's hurting you like this. Chopper kept going, but Izuku looked down again. Lift up your head. Izuku did indeed lift up his head when he saw Zoro and wondered how long the man had been standing there for. Never bow your head to anyone, Zoro told him. Not even this friend of yours. He's weak. Izuku looked confused. Weak? Kachan? Zoro grabbed the sword and slammed it down. Flaunting power around shows what a weak person you are. And that so-called friend of yours is no different. Chopper agreed 100%. He hadn't even met the boy and he already didn't like him. Izuku wanted to stand up for Kachan, he really did, but Zoro Sensei's words resonated with him, preventing him from trying to say how wrong the man was. He knew that deep down, Kachan was really a good person. He had to be, right? Thank you for coming with me to buy some food for the crew, Izuku, Chopper thanked. Izuku smiled. You're welcome, Chopper-san. Just call me Chopper, Chopper insisted. It feels good to walk around like this and not have to worry about people staring at me all the time. Really? Chopper nodded. Back where we're from, humans would always stare at me because I'm a talking reindeer, but I'm glad I don't have to worry about that here. That's good, Izuku smiled. Chopper's the best person I know. Chopper blushed. Hearing that doesn't make me happy, you jerk. You know, oh my god, I love when Chopper does that. I don't know why, I just love that man, Chopper. Anyways though, Izuku giggling, knowing Chopper didn't mean it and was simply expressing how embarrassed he was. Before Izuku could say anything else, he saw what appeared to be a girl with pale blonde hair wearing a white dress with matching shoes, cowering away from what appeared to be Kachan and his friends. Izuku immediately rushed in the way and said, "Get away from her, Kachan!" Before Kachan looks right at Izuku and says, "Get away from that girl, Izuku, before you get hurt." Chopper immediately rushed in front of Izuku, dropped the grocery bags, and then began to essentially growl towards the direction of Bakugo. From here, Bakugo and Izuku then begin talking to each other before Bakugo would go on to scream at Deku, telling him that he's nothing but a quirkless Deku. Chopper would then step in, telling him that Deku is not useless and that he should never call somebody who he calls a friend Deku. That's mean. Bakugo then looks at Chopper and says, "Why would I ever be friends with a quirkless Deku like him? I would never associate myself with that nerd." And Chopper, hearing this, would get pretty angry. From here, Bakugo would go on to pretty much start using an explosion in his hand, and he would go towards shooting an explosion towards Chopper. But it's at this point that Izuku would, seeing all this happen in slow motion with his emotions overflowing, would say, "Kachan, stop!" Oh, that was, yeah. Honestly, I think that is more or less what that would genuinely sound like. I had a voice crack in that moment, but I genuinely think that that's kind of what Izuku would sound like. It'd be kind of funny, like a high-pitched "stop!" Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. Anyways, so Izuku would go on to yell "stop," and for a moment, it was as if time itself had stopped. Izuku had just let out a burst of Conqueror's Haki, which had knocked out everybody in the vicinity, before Chopper looked towards Izuku and said, "Izuku, that was Haki." Izuku, seeing this, would see everybody around him unconscious, even the little girl that he had just saved. And Chopper would say, "Come on, we gotta get out of here." He goes on to grab the grocery bags and go back towards the Going Merry before Izuku and Chopper arrive, and Chopper goes on to explain to the crew what had happened. Following this, a couple of hours later, Izuku would be on the boat in another room when the Straw Hat Pirates would end up watching a news outlet which talk about how somebody had knocked everybody out with no damage and how they're going to be on the lookout for somebody with a strange knockout quirk. From here, Izuku would come into the room and the Straw Hat Pirates would go on to explain to him what Haki is. It's at this moment where everybody kind of ends up agreeing that, now they're going to actually have to teach Izuku Haki. They begin to explain to him what observation, conquerors, as well as armament Haki is, and it is at this moment when Izuku smiles and finally realizes that he did nothing wrong. He is a little bit shaken up about his use of Haki for the first time and what he had just done, but Izuku plans to get over it and learn how to utilize it, that way it never hurts anybody again. That's what Izuku's thinking. Luffy, on the other hand, when Izuku was gone and Law was outside of the ship, just kind of by himself, thinking, looking towards the sea, wondering how different this world truly was to their own, seeing as the sky and the sea almost looked identical. Luffy came next to him and no words were said. It was as if Law knew exactly what Luffy was thinking before he even said it, and he said, "You want to train the boy, don't you?" Luffy would look at him and say, "I do. I want to help him conquer his Conqueror's Haki." From here, Law smiles at him and says, "Do your thing, Straw Hat. I won't stop you." Luffy would have a determined look on his face before smiling and saying, "Thanks, Law." And from here, he would go into the room before yelling, "Hey, Sanji, I'm hungry. Whip me something up." Sanji growls and says, "Ugh, fine, Cap." He then goes on to whip Luffy up something in the kitchen, and Izuku would wake up the very next day that he would realize that he kind of misses his mom. He ends up going to visit his mom at his house, being brought there by Beppo, one of Law's crewmates, and from here he gets taken all the way back to his house. When Izuku arrives, he walks into the door to see Inko and the parents of the girl that he had saved yesterday, to be like, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" He then goes on to introduce himself as Izuku Midoriya, and they thank him so much for saving their daughter, that she told them exactly what had happened on that little altercation. Izuku smiles and rubs the back of his head before politely nodding and going towards the direction of the small girl. She goes on to tell him that her name is Her name is Lucy. Yeah, her name is Lucy, right? She looks at him and Izuku says, "Oh, Lucy, do you want to come to my room?" She immediately nods her head and goes, "Mm-hmm." And from here, they end up going towards Izuku's room where they begin to talk to each other and ask about what their favorite quirks are and who their favorite heroes are. She goes on to explain that she has a very powerful reality warping quirk that pretty much damages her body heavily anytime she uses it. And Izuku tells her that his quirk is a little weird, that it lets him control everything inside of a certain small domain. She says that that sounds awesome, and then he then goes on to ask her who her favorite hero is, which she goes on to explain that it's him. Izuku, hearing this, would say, "I'm your favorite hero," before she then goes on to say that he's the first person that stood in the way and protected her, so he's her biggest hero. Izuku would blush, and from here they both go on to kind of give each other a hug. Nothing in a weird way because they're kids, okay? So, they end up pretty much looking at each other, smiling, and passing out on Izuku's bed. When the parents and Izuku's mom ends up coming into the room, they think that it's extremely cute and they end up taking pictures of the two. From here, they end up pretty much arranging play dates all throughout the summer whenever Izuku wasn't training with the Straw Hat Pirates, and eventually when the summer was eventually starting to come to an end, this is when the Straw Hat Pirates would reveal that they would actually end up having to be going soon, saying that Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji ended up getting into it with some heroes from Japan, stating that they had fought against some dude named All Might who was claiming to them that they can't just go around doing whatever they want. Luffy ends up laughing, saying he just wanted to see how strong he was and he took it too seriously. And, Sanji was like, "Yeah, the dude was not even as strong as Izuku says, he's weak." But they would never tell him that because as Izuku sees things, that's their strongest thing in their world, so they're not exactly going to be bothering to budge with that. By the end of the summer, Izuku would have ended up having a lot more control over his haki, and they would actually end up leaving him a book that Nami would end up writing after Luffy tells her, kind of step by step of how he masters Conqueror's haki. What's it called? Law ends up actually gifting Izuku a sword of his own. And Zoro does as well. He actually ends up gifting him one of his own swords, telling him that if a single scratch is on that blade the next time they return, the sword will be the last, the villains of this world will be the last thing he's going to be having to worry about. Izuku would have a drop of sweat go down his face as sadness clearly comes into his eyes and he begins tearing up as he goes on to tell bye to the Straw Hat Pirates. Sanji leaves Izuku a cookbook, Zoro leaves him a training regimen, Luffy leaves him Conqueror's haki training, Law leaves him a book on pretty much medical expertise and also a book on his attacks and how to use them, with the Ope Ope fruit and more things that he just won't get to teach him, seeing as he won't be there for that long. But Izuku remembers most of it. Law had taught him many things, and almost all of his attacks that he would have had by the point of Wano, Izuku already is aware of due to the fact that Law would have demonstrated them to him personally. Izuku is sad to watch the Straw Hat Pirates go, but he knows he'll see them again someday. He doesn't know when, don't know where, I know we'll meet again. Okay, yeah, that's crazy. What do you guys think about Gravity Falls? I might do like a little Gravity Falls what if one of these days, if you guys like that. But anyways, so jumping back into reality, Izuku, once the Straw Hat Pirates are gone, he simply sits there on the dock with his mother Inko right next to him. She pats Izuku on the head, and from here, we're going to be having a huge, colossal anime time skip, to the point where Izuku is pretty much standing right outside of UA alongside Lucy. They both look at each other and smile, before they then go on to tell each other that this is the beginning of their new lives. Izuku looks to Lucy and says and wishes her the best of luck as they both enter the area and they end up sitting pretty nearby each other. Izuku sadly ends up having to sit pretty close to Bakugo, who gives him a weird stare, seeing as Izuku and Bakugo haven't exactly been on the best terms since Izuku started training with the Straw Hat Pirates. Seeing as once that happened, Izuku stopped letting things from Bakugo slide, and while Bakugo still wasn't aware of Izuku's ability of actually having a quirk, what Bakugo did know, however, was the fact that Izuku had something. That day that he was knocked out, Izuku had to have done something because it was just unnatural. It was strange. Bakugo always did have his suspicions about Izuku having a secret quirk, but he never outright showed it, so he never knew. However, his friend Lucy over there, she had the weakest quirk he'd ever known. So powerful, yet so weak in her hands, seeing as all she could do is create little animals and sentient beings. It was strange, but for now, that was the extent of the quirk of Izuku's friend Lucy, who had this strange reality warping thing where whatever the user wishes can happen. It's a mix of a quirk called Chaos, and it has serious reprimand damage on the user itself. That said, water break. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code ZETHER at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. Way better. Okay, I can get back into the story a lot easier now. So, as I said, they're both in the entrance exam, and I'm pretty sure many of you guys are probably wondering what happened during this little brief time skip. Essentially, Izuku ended up learning more and more things from Law Sensei and ended up developing his swordsman abilities with Zoro's training regimen. His physical capabilities are off the charts, and Izuku is, in the simplest terms, a little bit of a beast. If I had to tell you guys how powerful exactly, Izuku is when it comes to his swordsmanship skills, I would say that he's probably as strong as Zoro was pre-time skip when it comes to his swordsman skills. Nowhere near after the time skip, but he's getting there slowly as time progresses. Not only that, but when it comes to his control of the Ope Ope no Mi, Izuku pretty much has a level of control comparable to that of Law's when he was in the Dressrosa arc. So it's pretty skilled, and he has been working on mastering those extra moves that Law taught him, seeing as now he knows that they are in the range of possibility. Izuku now knows how to do those things. He also learned a couple of medical expertises from Chopper, as well as Law himself. And when it comes to his hockey, Izuku has that under wraps. He knows how to control armament hockey and observation hockey pretty damn well. When it comes to his Conqueror's hockey, Izuku hasn't quite nailed that one yet, seeing as that one's a lot more difficult than the other two. Seeing as, Luffy still hasn't even controlled that one perfectly yet, I don't see any reason why Izuku should. That said, that's pretty much the extent of Izuku's power, and he is a force to be reckoned with. Let me tell you, he has both Law's strange abilities with the Ope Ope root, but he could also get serious and down with the abilities of, kicking if he was to lose his swords, because he actually knows how to fight due to Sanji training him in the black leg style. Not only that, but he also knows some of Zoro's moves as well, such as Onigiri, because why not? I know that sounded horrible, but I'm not even going to retry to do it, but he does know how to do the Onigiri, right? And essentially what ends up happening is Izuku makes his way towards the entrance room. When it comes to the written portion of the exam, Izuku aces it no problems, and it's at this moment that Lucy as well as himself would end up being separated by the test proctors, who end up explaining to them that this is the part where they're all kind of going to have to do things on their own, seeing as they kind of have to move along with their own abilities without actually knowing the other person who's in their area. So Izuku's alone, Bakugo's alone, and Lucy's alone in her own training area. I'm going to be saying that Lucy actually does get into UA, but is in class 1B. Just because I don't really want to mess up the class 1A dynamic by adding Lucy's character into it, and I don't want to make that a huge focal point. Just know that Lucy is most definitely going to be Izuku's love interest for the series, but other than that, that's really all Lucy's going to be there for. The quirk that she currently has isn't going to be something that she can use proficiently up until when Izuku becomes even better doctor and learns how to kind of negate the effects of her quirk. So this is all they have to work with up until this point. That said, they would both go on to do their own portions, and Izuku's portion would go something like this. Izuku's in the back pretty much jamming out to his own things, and he has a hat that looks super similar to that of Law's on. He also has one of Law's old hoodies that he would have left to Izuku that he would have actually ended up growing into, and he has a sword nearby. he would have a sword because he would have pretty much asked the heroes if he was allowed to bring in a support item, which was just going to be a plain sword. They agreed so because nobody was going to really get harmed, seeing as it was robots, plus his quirk is unidentified when it comes to the records. So they're not sure what exactly Izuku has or if he even needs the sword. So they let it slide. And eventually what ends up happening is as soon as Izuku makes his way towards the area, he ends up creating a gigantic room after President Mike would end up saying, "There's no countdowns in a real battle, go, go, go!" Once that is all said and done, Izuku would simply let out "room," as he would then cut a piece of a rock off of the ground and throw it to the furthest edge of his room as he could. Once there, Izuku would say "shambles" as he ends up arriving in the spot of the rock, and he ends up pretty much running towards the direction of like 7 robots that are all standing in front of him. Immediately, Izuku would say "room" as he then proceeds to use his abilities to essentially cut the robots into different pieces and then rearrange them in different spots, leading Izuku to then smile as the robots fall onto the ground, and because their circuits are not connected properly anymore, the robots just explode. Izuku, watching this all go down, would have a smirk on his face as he sees one 3-point robot standing in front of him as he looks at it and says, "Come on, Sanji sensei, hopefully this works." He jumps up into the air and he uses Black Leg Sanji's fighting style to kick the robot's head clean off of its body and then continue rushing towards the direction of more robots, where once there, Izuku would end up using armament hockey to actually punch one of the 1-pointer's heads clean off into another robot, which would prompt it to rush in Izuku, which leads Izuku to say "room," and he then would use shambles as he switches places with the robots, but he has the head of the robot in his hand. He just holds it and flips it up into the air as the robot falls onto the ground, and Izuku would smile as he continues running, using more and more of Law's abilities to essentially clear this entire exam room, going through it as if it was nothing but a piece of cake. Once he ends up arriving to more difficult, more harder opponents, Izuku would end up whipping out moves such as the injection shot, radio knife, and also probably would have whipped out something such as like the personality swap if these things had personality, since they don't. So Izuku just continues doing his thing, and also I forgot to mention, he ended up actually copying Law's tattoos on his fingers, and he ends up taking up a lot of Law's things. Izuku does not have the sideburns or the goatee because the man is still young. I don't even think he can grow that yet, but he probably will in the future, just knowing how Izuku is. I mean, it's his master, and he wants to take after him in as many ways as he can. So Izuku's essentially trying his best. Not only would he use those normal attacks, but he would quite literally just destroy pieces of the ground, create giant rocks, and shoot them at the direction of the robots, destroying them, which would lead to Izuku getting off a ton of points in this exam, actually going on to break All Might's record for how many robots Izuku was capable of actually destroying. All Might would be utterly shocked at just how well Izuku was able to perform during this test, and Izuku would be having an absolute blast just using his sword that looks a lot like Law's. He would have added the little scrunchy little part, he would have ended up creating a sheath that looks exactly like Law's, and it isn't going to be cursed, because Izuku would have basically just personalized the sword that Law gave to him to look a tad similar to the one that Law has, but not exactly mimicking it. He also ends up actually using Zoro's sword that he would have given to him, which I'm just going to be saying is one of the random ones. Whichever one you guys want him to have is the one, just because I really don't have a name in store at the current moment. I know he wouldn't give him Shisui or Enma, so it would probably be another sword that isn't one of those. But Izuku would end up having 2 katanas in his hand. That said, what ends up basically going down is Izuku goes on to pretty much do great in terms of the robot portion of the exam up until when the 0-pointer would finally be revealed. Once this happens, Izuku would look towards the direction of the gigantic 0-pointer that stands behind him, as Izuku would look towards that direction of this gigantic robot, and he would proceed to say "counter shock" as he activates room beforehand and pretty much ends up decimating the 0-pointer by using the electricity that comes with the move to essentially mess up the zero-pointer circuits before it could have even crushed Araraka. He looks to her and uses room to move the rocks and his place so that he could pretty much help Araraka get up and then take her towards, I would say take her towards Recovery Girl, but he is a doctor, so he asks her what's wrong with her. She says her ankle might be hurt. Izuku gets down on one knee and asks her if this hurts, beginning to do strange motions with her foot, and she says it does. Izuku would wrap it up with a bandage before then telling her to keep it like this and telling her that it should heal in about a week. Araraka, hearing this, would smile to him and say thank you, and from here, Recovery Girl would get in front of Izuku saying to get out, get out, get out. Izuku looks towards Recovery Girl and says, I already treated her. She has this, and this. I'm not a doctor, so I can't exactly diagnose her, but Recovery Girl would be quite impressed with Izuku's diagnosis, and she would ask him how he knows all this. Izuku says that he has been dabbling in the medical fields for quite some time. And she would say, clearly. She then kisses Araraka and says, your recovery should be sped up, so now you'll heal in about 3 days. Araraka has a huge smile on her face, and she goes on to pretty much try to thank Izuku, but he's already gone. And Recovery Girl would have noticed that as well, saying, that boy has some potential. If only I was taking on apprentices, but she digresses. And from here, what ends up going on to happen is basically Izuku just waits for the exam letter to end up arriving to him, telling him if he passed or not. But from what Izuku could gather is that he most definitely should have passed that exam, seeing as he didn't get hit a single time by any robot via observation hockey, and he pretty sure he broke every record when it comes to UA's school and like all the things that could potentially happen with Izuku and like pretty much like everything that he could have done. Izuku ends up getting an acceptance letter as well as does Lucy, but like I said before, she ends up going towards class B, which is a little saddening to Izuku, but it is what it is. I mean, the dude's not going to do anything grimy behind her back, and he knows she won't either. So they're both just happy that they made their way to UA. Izuku and Lucy don't end up seeing each other as much as they would have wanted at school, but anytime that they would hang out or get the chance to in the cafeteria the first day, they're gonna do so. That said, the first day would come right around the corner and Lucy and Izuku would get dropped off by Luffy's parents, as they would end up saying that they better do a great job in school and that they better give them grandchildren soon. Izuku looks towards the parents of Lucy and she has the biggest, brightest, embarrassed expression on her face. She is looking like a whole tomato. The mom would then say she's joking and Izuku would have a red face as well, saying that, you know, he's too young for that. She would say she's obviously joking, and from here they end up going inside with strange, queasy smiles on their face. They end up making their way inside, and the day would pretty much be awkward. From here, Izuku makes his way towards the classroom where he spots Katsuki Bakugo in the area, arguing with a boy with blue hair by the name of Tenya Ida. When Izuku sees this, he immediately understands that, Bakugo. Sad to see you made it, but he knew it was gonna happen. He then goes on to sit somewhere towards the middle of the classroom when suddenly a girl with brown hair would end up rushing in the classroom towards Izuku. Before suddenly, Aizawa stops this interaction and tells everybody to meet him outside in their UA uniforms. They all go get changed after a little bit of questioning via Araraka, and following that little situation, what ends up essentially going down after this is they make their way outside and they end up pretty much being briefed on the UA quirk apprehension test that Aizawa does. They end up asking why, and Aizawa says that the real world, it keeps trying to act as if, you know, quirks aren't giving people advantages when they are. He throws the ball at Izuku and asks him how far he can throw the ball. Izuku gives him a score even more impressive than that of Katsuki Bakugo, which was more or less something around the ranges of 100 something meters, right? He would be extremely impressed and ask if that truly is without a quirk. Izuku says that he's been training his physical strength since he can remember, and that's why he's as strong as he is. And Aizawa just takes his word for it. He goes on to tell Izuku that he better do his best when it comes to the ball throw, and Izuku would just begin to think about how exactly he's gonna be throwing this ball as far as he possibly can. He thinks about it slowly before he then comes upon the conclusion of just saying, okay, whatever. He goes on to say, room, as from here a blue orb expands, leading everybody in the UA classroom to take a couple of steps back. They're like, what the? Before Izuku then looks to them, reaches his arm back and throws the ball as far as he possibly could, using his maximum strength and actually using his abilities to essentially, control what's going on in the area. He ends up shooting the ball a couple, like 1,000 meters away, and everybody would end up being quite impressed by Izuku's, actually not 1,000, more like 700 something, right? That's more realistic. That said, once he does this, everybody would be extremely shocked via Izuku's power, and Bakugo would even be angry as well, rushing towards the direction of Izuku before promptly being stopped by Aizawa and his scarf as well as his quirk, telling him that one more little outburst like that and he's out of here. Izuku looks to Bakugo with a expressionless face on him as he then walks towards the back of everybody, as Mina goes on to say that this is so awesome. Aizawa then explains to them that since it's so fun, how about they up the stakes a little bit. The person who comes in last place is getting expelled from UA permanently. After everybody hears that, they immediately get on their A game and they go on to complete the rest of the quirk apprehension test, which Izuku goes on to complete with no problems at all. He actually ends up getting the first place when it comes to this, because Izuku in this version is pretty big brain and he doesn't have to actually rely on his troubles that he had to deal with when it comes to One for All. He does great in almost all of the exams and gets like second place, if not first or third, for all of them, which leads Izuku to actually end up getting first place at the top of everything. And once school was all said and done and Izuku began walking home towards the direction of Lucy, where they were going to meet up at the train station, Bakugo catches up to Deku and tells him, "What the hell was that back there, Deku? What were you doing? I knew you had a quirk this whole time. Ever since that day at the park, I've known, Izuku. I've always known." Izuku looks towards the direction of Bakugo, and this is when Lucy would finally end up catching up. She's like, "Hey, Izuku!" Bakugo then looks to Lucy and says, "That little freak over there has always had a strange quirk too. You little strange dynamic duo. Just get out of my way, Deku, and maybe there won't be any problems." He shoves Izuku out of the way and walks home before Izuku just looks to Lucy, who goes on to ask him, same old, and Izuku just says, "Yeah, just another episode, just another one of Bakugo's little episodes." They then kind of just be like, whatever, and from here they get on the train and make their way towards Izuku's house, where, where Lucy would walk in and be like, "Hey, Auntie Inko," before she would say, "Oh, stop that. I'm more than just an auntie to you. You can go ahead and call me mother-in-law." Izuku's face goes red since they're not officially dating and they've never done anything, but both parents just know that they like each other. I mean, they've been with each other since they were kids and they've pretty much always been there for each other. Either they're going to be the greatest best friends of all time, or they have the biggest crushes on each other. And the parents are willing to bet that it's probably going to be the second one. That said, they end up going towards the direction of Izuku's room, where they end up dropping their bags off and going on to play video games just like they would any other day. This is when Lucy, in a moment of silence, begins asking Deku if he feels weird about what their parents have been saying. Izuku looks to her as he pauses the game and says, "What about?" She says, "Oh, just nothing, don't worry about it," with a little bit of a blush on her face. Izuku looks towards her direction and says, "Well, I mean, honestly, can I be honest with you, Lucy?" She looks at him and says, "Yeah." And from here, Izuku looks towards her before telling her that since they were kids, he's actually loved her a lot. She goes on to say, "Oh, I've loved you too, Izuku." And Izuku stops before saying, "No, it's more than that. I like you, like you." And she stops before then, jumping on Izuku with a huge squeal and then saying, "Me too." They then begin to pretty much start making lots of noise and they land on the ground where she's on top of him and Izuku's just laying on the ground with a weird expression in his face. Inko walks into the room and opens it, watching what had just happened before she has a smirk on her face and says, "I'll just close this door now." From here, they quickly pick up the pieces of what they had just done, and she goes on to explain to him that, if he wants to, they could maybe try this out. And Izuku goes on to tell her that he's all for the idea. He has genuinely been wanting to do this since he can remember. They then pretty much end up solidifying their little relationship thingy-majigger. And the next day of school ends up rolling around right around the corner, which would pretty much be time skipped to the final class of the day, seeing as during lunchtime, Izuku and Lucy would have hung out with each other and shown everybody else that they were clearly more than just friends. Bakugo would have been like, I knew it, Deku. And from here, once the final class of the day starts, Bakugo would have just been eyeing Izuku with daggers the entire day. Izuku doesn't even bother with it because he's kind of used to it, and this is when All Might busts in the door, claiming that he's walking in like a normal person. Everybody goes on to be excited, and they're like, oh, it's All Might! Before All Might just looks at them and goes, ah, 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 ah. He then goes on to explain to everybody that to be pros, you gotta look the part. Before clicking a button on this remote that he had and revealing that the walls could like turn and reveal their costumes. He then gives them ticket numbers and they all go on to get changed. Izuku's costume, I'm pretty sure you guys could guess what Izuku's costume's gonna be. It's going to literally be Law's outfit. Law's literal outfit is Izuku's costume. He ends up asking for a replica coat that Law wears, the same hat, and that's it. It's just a hat and a coat. Everybody would look at Izuku's costume and be like, don't you think that looks a little strange? Izuku would say, honestly, no. And just imagine Izuku in Law's costume with his hair that looks almost the same as it does in canon, a little bit more mature. Actually, his hair would be a lot shorter just because he ended up picking up a shorter hairstyle. And yeah, but just imagine Izuku's face in place of Law's, and that's pretty much just what he looks like. That said, everybody seeing him would think that he looks pretty cool, and since Lucy's not here, Izuku just goes on to, just listen to what All Might's saying. All Might would then go on to explain that, oh my god, I'm getting tired as I'm doing this but All Might would then go on to explain that, basically they're all just going to be drawing some numbers from this hat. And Izuku says, for what? Before All Might goes on to explain, good question, young Midoriya, for this. He then whips out another button from his pouches or whatever and ends up revealing to them a TV, which shows them the event that they're going to be doing, which is essentially the heroes versus villains thing. Everybody then goes on to draw their names, and Izuku would end up getting Uraraka just like in canon versus Ida as well as Katsuki Bakugo. Following this, Bakugo just looks at Izuku and clenches his fist before releasing an explosion, and Uraraka walks over to Deku before asking him, why does that kid always look at you weird? Izuku says that they've been childhood rivals since they were kids and that they used to be best friends, but something changed when Bakugo activated his quirk. Uraraka says, oh wow, I guess I'll just help you beat him then, so that you could be the best out of the rivals. Izuku says, thanks about that, but it won't be necessary. And from here, he goes on to enter the room, in which Bakugo immediately begins to get into it with Ida and tell him that it's best to just stay out of his way. Bakugo goes on to essentially look towards the outside of the hallway and begin to essentially blast towards the direction of where Izuku's gonna be at, blasting down the hallways as fast as he possibly can, yelling out, Deku! He finally ends up getting close to that of Deku's area, which they would have already been towards the second floor, and Deku would look towards Uraraka before saying, don't worry, I got this. He then goes on to say, room, before Bakugo would look towards the direction of Izuku, and Izuku then looks back towards Uraraka and says, sorry about this, but I kind of need to do this to win. He then says, what is even the ability name where he switches personalities? Let me check that real quick. I'm pretty sure it's just personality switch operation. He basically just does that where he uses shambles and their personalities of Bakugo and Uraraka switch. Once Uraraka is in the body of Bakugo, they both kind of end up waking up a little bit after. And no, I'm gonna be saying that they immediately just feel the effects, just because it will make more of a comedic scene. But Bakugo looks towards the direction of Izuku and then says, Deku! But he ends up hearing his voice and he's like, what's going on? It's feminine like Uraraka's. He then goes on to look at him and say, damn Deku, what did you do? Reverse it! Before Izuku looks at him and says, nah, Kachan, you're stuck like that, at least until I get this over with. and he then goes on to whip out the tape and cover Bakugo's body with it. He rushes over trying to stop Izuku from, pretty much capturing Bakugo, but All Might just says Bakugo Katsuki has been captured. Izuku would then say "Room" before suddenly switching their personalities back, and Uraraka would begin feeling her bone body, being like, thank God. She looks at him and says, why'd you do that? And Izuku says that it was for winning, that he had no intention of hurting her at all. She then goes on to say, well, right, before they then make their way towards the direction of where Ida will be at, and once they finally end up arriving at the area, Izuku would look to Ida as he opens the door, and Ida would begin monologuing, being like, ha ha ha, finally, hero. Izuku then looks to Uraraka and says, sorry about this one too. Shambles, before suddenly he begins to essentially switch the position of both himself and the both Uraraka and the bomb, and then he places his hand on the bomb saying hero team wins, as All Might would say hero team wins, and everybody would be like, yo, he's insane, he's incredible. Everybody begins to hype Izuku up, and Izuku just begins to accept the praise that he's getting from his entire classroom. He goes on to explain, yeah, but his quirk is really nothing special, and everybody then says, you kidding, dude? Your quirk is amazing. It's probably the best quirk in UA. Izuku thanks them all for that, and he ends up making his way towards the front gates of UA, where he ends up meeting Lucy once more and asking her what the plan is today. She ends up telling him that today she actually has to go out with her family for some dinner, but that she'll happily hang out with him the next day. Izuku smiles and says that sounds perfect, and he then begins to watch her as she gets into the car and ends up making her way towards, the place that they were going to go out to eat. Izuku begins walking his way towards the bullet train, and once he arrives, he makes his way home, only to pretty much put all of his stuff down and then pretty much go on YouTube. He clicks on his latest YouTuber's videos, which is by the name of Zether, and it starts off something like this. This is a part of the video where I'm actually going to pretty much sell myself out completely and not even talk about what if, but more or less talk about future projects and what I'm going to be doing. Trust me, literally will only take a minute, so if you don't care about this, just skip a minute. That said, boys, I have some legendary news. I bought Lost Sword, and not just a replica, but a battle ready sword, a literal katana that I can use to cut stuff down. Number one, I got it just for displaying it in the background of my videos, because pretty soon I'm actually going to start using a professional camera to actually show myself in the videos and show more editing, more edited videos in the process, and more anime discussion videos and more things that are around anime that might not be what ifs. I'm slowly going to start shifting out of what ifs, but you guys are still going to be getting what ifs for at least another 3 months, so don't worry about that. I'm going to try my very best to give you guys the best content I can before I inevitably leave. And just know, what ifs are still going to be coming every now and then whenever I get a good idea or something like that, because I don't want to leave you guys hanging. You guys made me who I am, and I don't want to let you guys go. But if you support me, thank you. But if you don't, I completely understand. I mean, I pretty much made you guys love what if, so if you guys don't stay, I completely understand. That said though, what I'm going to be doing now is just a little bit of a different content, but it's still obviously going to be revolving around anime. That said, that's pretty much it for this. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, and make sure to turn on those post notifications, because YouTube has been acting up recently and pretty much making it so that if you don't turn on all notifications, you literally won't get all my videos. That said, back into the what if. So Izuku, after watching this video from his favorite YouTuber by the name of Zether, would think, okay, I'm definitely going to keep up with this channel, before then going on to essentially pass out until the very next day, and about a week would go by of normal casual school days where Izuku hangs out with Lucy during the week and ends up getting kind of familiarized with his classmates. Eventually, Aizawa ends up telling them all about the USJ event, and they end up all agreeing on essentially getting permission slips lined and making their way towards there. Fast forward to the day where they're actually inside the USJ after the little incident where Ida was made a classroom president, and 13 ends up going on to pretty much explain to everybody the blatant obvious truth that quirks can, well, be dangerous. By the way, guys, if you guys hear police sirens in the background, my bad. Your boy is not living in the best part of town. That said though, basically what ends up essentially happening is Izuku then just is in the background, right? He's obviously not really paying attention to 13 because he just couldn't care less about what she has to say. He's just honestly thinking about Lucy and how, you know, what had happened last night happened. Just thinking back to his little great moments with her. And by great moments, I mean juicy, hot steaming session. Now, I'm gonna leave that up to your interpretation, whether you think it's this kind of session, that kind of session, or that kind of session. But I'm not exactly gonna tell you guys anything. That said though, eventually this is when Kurogiri would end up appearing in the middle of the room. And once this happens, Izuku would look towards the direction of Aizawa after Kirishima says, "Cool, you guys even added fake villains?" As soon as Aizawa says, "Those aren't fake villains, 13, save the kids." And you know, 13 begins to essentially be like, "Okay guys, get back," and all this stuff pretty much ends up happening. Kurogiri would get rushed at by Katsuki Bakugo as well as Kirishima, and once that happens, Izuku was able to notice that the portal guy wasn't able to be attacked. So what Izuku would do is essentially say "shambles" before suddenly or no, not shambles, but he would say "room" and then say "shambles," as he ends up switching places with one of his classmates who would end up falling from the sky and just dropping, but one of them who he knew would be able to you know, take the brunt of the force of smashing into the ground, and Kurogiri would pretty much be right next to Izuku. From here, Izuku would go on to perform the personality switching operation on Kurogiri, which would lead to other people in Izuku's class to actually be in Kurogiri's body. So yeah, and Kurogiri would end up transferring consciousness into that of one of Izuku's classmates. Kurogiri would ask what had happened in the body of, say, Mineta, and Mineta would be like, "What? What am I doing in here?" inside of Kurogiri's body. Izuku then goes on to explain to Mineta that he'll switch him back after all of this is over, before then jumping down, and everybody who would pretty much not want to fight would be right next to 13. 13 would look towards the direction of Mineta, who's just floating in the air using Kurogiri's quirk, as, you know, he ends up just sitting there, while people like Bakugo, Kirishima, and all the more battle-hungry people would end up rushing down and trying to fight villains alongside Aizawa. Izuku, using his blade and not even using room or anything like that, would begin to pretty much decimate any and all villains that are nearby, before finally Izuku decides that he's done playing games and ends up trying to let out a little bit of his Conqueror's Haki, in a scene very similar to that of the Shark Island, where they pretty much ended up going under the sea and they made their way towards the area where Luffy knocked out like half of the army using his Conqueror's Haki. In a scene extremely similar to that, Izuku would let out a burst of Conqueror's Haki, which would knock out most of the weak-willed evil characters that are standing nearby. Most of them would be affected, and even Kurogiri would be as well. Shigaraki. That said, it's at this moment that Izuku begins taking down most and all of the villains that begin standing in his way, and he uses armament Haki to actually coat his blades with his Haki to actually cut them so that they become black blades. He does this and he ends up rushing towards the direction. Actually, no, he's not able to do that because Zoro wasn't able to do that. So yeah, never mind. He doesn't coat them with Haki, but he does use armament Haki on himself so that he doesn't take any damage, right? He begins to essentially start rushing in, and he ends up using his swords to essentially begin to dismantle many of the villains that are nearby, eventually making his way towards the direction of the big bad, Shigaraki, as he then finally lets out "Room!" And suddenly, Shigaraki would be standing there as he begins rushing towards the direction of Izuku, as Izuku throws a rock up and says "Shambles." He then teleports towards its direction and says, you know, you do look like a pretty big freak from the place that I'm standing in. How about we fix that? And you seem to like hands a lot, so how about this? Izuku then uses his ability to essentially cut Shigaraki's hands off, and they begin floating mid-air. Shigaraki is wondering what's going on, and Izuku would use Shambles to teleport the hands to Izuku's, area, not placing all 5 fingers down because the hands are just still. They're without their user, so they can't use their quirk anymore. Izuku holds these out in front of Shigaraki, and Shigaraki would look down at the stubs that he now has in place as he then asks what's going on and what this place is. Izuku says that this is his domain and that he can play God if he wants at this area. This is when suddenly water from the nearby area would essentially begin floating up into the air as Shigaraki is terrified, and the water then smashes down onto Shigaraki's body as Shigaraki essentially begins to be flung around by the mass of water that would hit him. Not only that, but the rocks that would be in the water and the people who like the villains that would form a tornado inside of it would begin hitting Shigaraki until all of them just disperse on the floor, and the only thing left would be the Nomu. And since the Nomu hasn't gotten the orders of kill that kid, the Nomu just sits there. Eventually, Shigaraki's able to let out kill that brat, as he then falls into unconsciousness, and the Nomu would then go on to roar before rushing in at Izuku's direction. Izuku says he's not playing games before he then rushes in and uses one of Zoro's attacks to essentially try to slice into the Nomu. He uses a two-sword style. He doesn't know the full three because, you know, right now he can't use it since he doesn't have his third sword on him, but he uses the two-sword style, and then he proceeds to essentially, how do I put this? He uses the two-sword style and proceeds to essentially cut into the Nomu, but he doesn't actually finish the cut because the Nomu's skin is too hard. Since it has shock absorption and regeneration, the sword would actually end up getting stuck inside of the Nomu's body before Izuku then gets punched away by the Nomu, and Izuku feels the burn of that attack. That was powerful. Izuku looks back onto the Nomu, and he didn't activate his armor in Haki before that, so he definitely felt the brunt force of the attack. He then uses Shambles to get his swords back and then thinks to himself how exactly he's going to be beating this Nomu. But he ends up thinking back to what Luffy had told them a long time ago, that there will always be barriers in front of you, but it's your job to destroy them and, you know, pass your limits every single time. Izuku, seeing this small vision of Luffy, he then remembers back to the Straw Hats and how Zoro told him to never turn his back onto anybody, never bow down, never show fear, to simply go in guns blazing. Izuku, hearing this, would think to himself, you know what? They're right. Before he then pretty much begins to essentially look down at the ground and think to himself that it's about time that he stopped being soft as he always is, saying that he now needs to pretty much let out a true attack. He then lets out Room as he expands it even more, and the area is pretty large at this point. The Nomu then begins, just looking at Izuku as it begins rushing towards him, and Izuku would simply let out Injection Shot as he ends up using one of Law's attacks to pierce the Nomu, suddenly taking its heart out of its body. By using the injection shot, he ends up pretty much piercing it and destroying a lot of its organs from the inside, and also cutting its entire heart out, before then beginning to slowly start squeezing it, leading the Nomu to actually start screeching due to the pain that it's actually feeling. The Nomu would not be able to essentially recover, and Izuku would end up saying that this thing isn't even alive, before dropping the Nomu's heart to the ground and crushing it beneath his foot, saying that that is that. Aizawa then ends up arriving close by after defeating all the rest of the villains, and Izuku would end up going on to look towards Aizawa before telling him that All Might should be arriving in 3, 2, 1. All Might would end up arriving, and it's at this point that Aizawa would be like, how did you? But Izuku would simply end up stating that he just knew. And it's at this point that we basically have Izuku just look as All Might looks into the USJ dumbfounded by what had just happened, at this current moment. Izuku had pretty much destroyed all the villains single-handedly and saved them from what could have been. They end up getting Kurogiri into one of Tartarus's prisons, actually taking Shigaraki himself and the Nomu's body to actually study its, anatomy and how it works and all that, and also actually questioning Izuku on what had happened that day. Everybody says that Izuku saved them all, and Izuku goes on to explain that he just did what he had to do. From here, everybody begins to kind of be like, okay. And then Izuku just kind of does his thing, I guess you could say. I really have no other way of explaining it. How do I put this? Izuku ends up going where with Mineta and Kurogiri and Aizawa and a couple of other heroes to Tartarus. He ends up using his personality switch after Kurogiri is placed in the cell, and Mineta finally is able to go back to his body, saying, "Thank you, Izuku," before he then goes off somewhere, and Izuku simply looks to All Might and asks, "So what now?" Izuku is then promptly told that all they have now to do is to essentially make their way back to UA because the UA Sports Festival is happening in about 1 week. Izuku goes on to pretty much be told that they're going to be having a 1 week break due to the villain attack and UA having to clean a couple of things up, and all of the students would be given a 1 week break, which Izuku and Lucy would use to their full advantage, training together, studying together, and also hanging out together, if you catch my drift. Eventually though, Izuku and Lucy would both unfortunately have to return to school after the 1 week break would be over, and once they end up arriving there, they would both be informed of the inevitable event of the UA Sports Festival, in which everybody in the UA school is going to actually have to take part in. Izuku would actually be informed by Aizawa himself that he's actually going to be having to give out a speech at the UA Sports Festival for everybody to get hype over. Izuku would ponder over this, thinking to himself what exactly it is that he's going to be saying to get everybody hyped up. He's never really been that type of person, not ever since he was a little kid. His personality ended up taking a drastic turn after he met the Straw Hats and wanted to kind of take after them a little bit, show that he matured a bit. And also, he would kind of have a little bit of a Luffy personality type, mixed in with the seriousness of Zoro and the kindness of Izuku, as well as good-naturedness that he has in his heart because of Inko's, kind of just job of raising Izuku. Izuku would also be compassionate because, he has Lucy with him, and that's somebody who Izuku has always kind of been able to have a soft spot for. Eventually though, the hour would end up ending and the period that they were in were pretty much over, and they would eventually get to the end of the day. Once there, this is when they would enter outside and they would open the door only to realize that general course students as well as class 2B students were on their doorway, trying to quote unquote assess the competition, as they would say. But one thing that would grow inevitably clear is that essentially they're only there to kind of try to intimidate Class 1A because of the simple fact that they feel a certain type of way towards, Class 1A. I mean, they've already encountered villains and made it out unscathed, and many rumors are starting to come out about the young man by the name of Izuku Midoriya. His prowess as a swordsman and overall prowess as a hero overall is something that's catching the attention of many heroes alike. That said, once all was said and done, the day would eventually arrive of the UA Sports Festival and Izuku would be called up to the podium by midnight. She would go on to inform Izuku that he better go kill it out there, slapping the man on the butt as he begins to pretty much go up the stairs, kind of with a little bit of like an irritated face because he doesn't really like that. Lucy, watching this, would get a hint of jealousy on her face, and Izuku would go up to the podium as he touches the mic and goes, I'm not really good at this, but and then he goes on to give some cool speech that I'm not even going to try to embarrass myself over to try to give, okay? But Izuku, just know, he ends up giving out a dope speech, he ends up telling everybody to try their best, and he ends up kind of saying that he's going to win without saying it, I guess you could say. He says it in the nice way that Bakugo would have never done. When Izuku gets down, Bakugo would look to Izuku with a grin and say, "You know what? You sure do know how to give a speech, Deku." As from here, Izuku just walks past him and Lucy goes over to Izuku to hug him and tell him that he did a great job. From here, Midnight would go on to say that there will be no friendships during the UA Sports Festival, that everybody is going to try to work hard and against each other in order to survive, telling them that the first obstacle that they're going to have to overcome is going to be the race, going on to then get everybody into their starting positions and then blow the whistle for the race to begin. As soon as this happens, let me tell you, literally as soon as this happens, Todoroki slams his foot onto the ground and begins to essentially freeze everything around himself. Izuku, however, would simply let out "room" as he then cuts the ice beneath his feet and pretty much begins to cut all of the ice that's in the dome that Izuku would have created, the blue orb. Izuku, following this, would pretty much begin running towards the direction of Todoroki's area. And Izuku doesn't even begin doing anything other than putting his sword back into his sheath and essentially running at top speeds to show that he doesn't even need to use his overpowered devil fruit to even defeat anybody. So essentially that's what Izuku does. He begins using his devil fruit abilities, or actually not using his devil fruit abilities, trying to show that he is more than just his devil fruit. He can do more. That said, my man Izuku proceeds to essentially speed blitz his way towards the finish line, going over each and every single obstacle that would have come by his way. Eventually though, Izuku would get neck and neck alongside those of Bakugo Katsuki as well as Todoroki Shoto. And once he is there, he essentially gets to the point where he sees the mines. Izuku has a smirk on his face as he begins using observation haki to weave and dodge all of the explosions perfectly, with Bakugo and Todoroki watching, shocked at Izuku's, well, apparent just nonchalant dodging of what's going on. Izuku, when he does this, ends up making his way towards the finish line and actually ends up getting first place via swapping places with Todoroki at the very end. He was almost about to win when Izuku was running, shouted "Room!" and then used shambles to switch places with Todoroki, leaving him to be first, Bakugo to be second, and Todoroki to be third. Once they started the actual event of the cavalry battle, Izuku would have essentially made it his mission to simply choose Mei Hatsume, Lucy, as well as Dark Shadow. Why is he choosing these characters? Because, well, he doesn't have the same relationship with Uraraka, so she essentially would end up joining whatever team Ida joins. Not that they are their apparent love interest, but just that they are more friendly with each other. That's really it. That said, what ends up essentially happening is Izuku tells the team not to play any offense whatsoever, to simply allow Bakugo and Todoroki to come in and take their headbands. And they do so. Bakugo comes in guns blazing with his explosions and ends up taking the 100 million headband from Izuku. Once Izuku sees that he lost it, he would simply tell them all to stay put, that they're not moving until the last 10 seconds. The team is utterly confused on what Izuku's talking about, and they genuinely believe that they're gonna lose. Mei Hatsume wants to do something because of the fact that she wants to show her babies off, but Izuku assures her that her babies will be shown off later on. When it comes to Lucy, she wholeheartedly trusts Izuku. And Tokiyami is kind of unsure of why he joined this team, but he ends up going along with it, until the very last 10 seconds when Izuku gets nearby Shoto and Bakugo themselves, and he then goes on to say, "Room!" Shambles, as he takes the headbands of all the headbands that Todoroki and Bakugo's team would have accumulated, all of them, leaving all of Todoroki and Shoto's team to essentially be eliminated in the cavalry race, or the cavalry battle, meaning that when it comes to the final battles, literally the only person who's going to give Izuku any little bit of challenge is going to be Shinso. But the way that I see this all playing down is essentially as soon as the first battle would be announced, we would have Todoroki and Bakugo both kind of press Izuku, telling him that he cheated at the very last second, that they should have known better, and Izuku's gonna be on their watch list from now on. Izuku goes on to tell the both of them that it's their fault for dropping their guards, that they should know to assess the skills and techniques of all of their opponents, that Izuku did just that and it's not his fault that they're garbage. Lucy would end up making her way forward, and the first battle that Izuku would end up actually taking part in wouldn't be against Shinso. That's probably going to be around more towards the end. I'm going to be saying that Shinso actually ends up going against Lucy and beats her via brainwashing. Second battle would end up being Izuku versus Shinso, which I'm going to be saying that the way that this essentially plays out is basically Shinso begins trying to essentially talk smack on Lucy. Izuku gets angry and is about to say something, but he then remembers back to what Ojiro told him about how he spoke to Shinso and suddenly it was as if all of his movements were taken away from him. Not only that, but Lucy herself told Izuku that. So instead of doing that, Izuku simply let out "Room" and then used shambles to essentially disembody Shinso into different pieces like arms and heads, and pretty much put him back together in a weird way so that everybody watching was confused, before then pushing Shinso out and replacing everything back to how it should be. Shinso would be extremely shocked and wondering what that was, and Izuku would go on to be the winner of the sports festival when suddenly the big screen at the UA Sports Festival would switch to that of Tartarus quite literally being broken into as we speak. It's at this moment that the UA Sports Festival would be cut short because many of the hero staff that were there would end up having to make their way towards the Tartarus prison, because at this current moment, All For One is currently breaking out Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and a bunch of the most powerful villains in all of Tartarus that he could muster and gather. Because Izuku capturing Shigaraki and Kurogiri definitely puts the brakes on All For One's plans, and this is something that needs to be taken advantage of. The fact that many heroes are at the UA Sports Festival, this is the best time for All For One to step in. That said, he breaks a bunch of people out, and we're now going to be skipping forward 2 days after the apparent defeat of everybody else via Izuku being a total badass. He'd be on the beach, the same beach that he met the Straw Hats in, just simply wondering why, all those villains ended up breaking out of Tartarus, and thinking to himself that that's not going to be a good thing. He looks down at his phone to see a message from Lucy, ends up answering and says, "Hey, so what's up?" She texts him saying not to worry about it, that it's not his fault and it was out of his control. And Izuku says he knows that, but he still can't help but to be bothered by it. She tells him they'll hang out tomorrow, maybe that'll get his mind off of it. But this is when Izuku would pretty much end up sitting down onto the beach and staring towards the ocean, wondering to himself when he'll ever see the Straw Hats again. When suddenly, a wormhole would end up opening right in front of Izuku, and before his eyes a gigantic ship would fall in the ocean, splattering water all over Izuku as his eyes widen and he looks to the more grown-up versions of the Straw Hat Pirates. Seeing all of them together once again literally brings Izuku to tears as he watches all of them come back as a crew. And by all of them, I mean Law, because he inevitably ended up joining the Straw Hats. Why did he join the Straw Hats? Because that's just something I want. I mean, come on. Law should join the Straw Hats already and stop acting like he's his own captain, bro. Like, just join the Straw Hats. Your squad is ass. Just join Luffy and, do better. That's just what I want. But anyways, in my own fact fiction world, I can make that happen. So I'm going to. That said though, basically what ends up happening following this little thing is Izuku jumps on the boat immediately to greet the Straw Hat Pirates, who end up ruffling his hair, and Nami ends up bringing Izuku in for the biggest hug in the world, saying that he's grown a lot. Izuku says he knows, and he goes on to say that ask them how long they're going to be here for. Luffy says, I don't think they should recognize us after all these years, so maybe a month? Luffy then goes on to pretty much tell Izuku that this is most likely the last time they'll ever come back, but that's why they're gonna make the most of it. Izuku tells them that, since they're gonna be here and he's now kind of a hero in training, this time around maybe he can help it so that they won't get in trouble for what happens this time. Luffy thinks about that and says, nah, I'm good. And from here, Izuku goes on to say, really? But Luffy looks at him and says, nah, I'm just kidding. I've matured a bit. He then goes on to jump off of the ship, and all of the Straw Hats in all of their glory just come in, say hi, what's up. They just have a great night. They drink and they eat food and they have a blast. And Law ends up asking Izuku how far he's come, asking Izuku to a spar, which he ultimately destroys Izuku in, but he is extremely proud, saying that for him to have come this far without people of their level in this world is beyond him, saying that Law would have never imagined to get that strong in the amount of years that Izuku has. And Izuku thanks Law for, the good gesture and stuff like that. Zoro tells Izuku that he was way stronger than he was at his age, and that if he keeps practicing, maybe he'll catch up to how strong they were the last time they arrived. They go on to essentially ask Izuku if he's worked on his haki, and he goes on to show them that he has. It's a pretty weak, watered down version of theirs, but it's haki nonetheless. And in a world where nobody else has it, haki is pretty much a God-sent gift, pretty much. So Izuku is pretty OP. Eventually the night would end, and the very next day he would inevitably have school. It would be a Monday. So Izuku returns to school only to be told about the fact that he needs to pick a hero name, so he would end up picking the name of Water D. No. I'm not gonna do all that, but maybe yeah. He ends up picking the hero name Trafalgar D. Law. That's the name that he picks, or Law for short. The operating hero, Law. That's gonna be his hero name. And when it comes to who he's gonna internship with, he ends up actually speaking with All Might about that, because it's at this moment that All Might begins wanting to actually talk to Izuku about something very important. Something in regards to Izuku actually becoming a successor of All Might. When All Might ends up bringing Izuku out of the room, he ends up essentially spilling the beans about One for All, as well as Gran Torino, and how he wants Izuku to be the inheritor of One for All. After Izuku hears about the fact that All Might's injured and that's the sole purpose on why he wants to pass the quirk down, Izuku asks to see the injury, stating to All Might that he's a doctor. He could potentially check it out. All Might goes on to tell Izuku that he's been checked on by the best doctors in the world, and that there's nothing that they could do about it. And Izuku looks at All Might. He tells him that there's no harm in trying, right? And All Might says he assumes there isn't, so he then goes on to lift his shirt and show Izuku the damage. Izuku, upon seeing this, would think that that is one horrible injury, before he then goes on to ask what they've done to try to fix it. All Might explains all of the things that they've tried to do, and Izuku, upon thinking about it for just 10 seconds, looks at All Might with a dumb expression on his face, and then goes on to ask him why he never simply got a replacement stomach. If you can't repair that one, why not get an all new one? One that could be genetically created with his DNA cells and a bit of his blood and all this crazy other samples that they have. With the technology they have access to, this should be more than an easy procedure. And All Might, after hearing this, would think to himself that that's actually a great idea, asking Izuku how he came up with that idea and how he knows so much. Izuku explains to him that he's been dabbling in medical science for quite a couple years, since he was like, I don't know, around the age that he met the Straw Hats in, which is, I don't know how old he was, but it's been a couple of years, right? At least like, he's 14, he was probably like 7 or something like that, I don't know, but he was relatively young, right? So it's at least been like 7 years, right? So let's just throw all their coins into a basket and just assume that Izuku goes on to deny One for All. And after All Might is given this idea, he actually goes into an intensive surgery which repairs his respiratory system, allowing him not to have to go back down into a Small Might form. After Izuku does that, he actually goes on to tell All Might that he would like to not intern with anybody other than the Straw Hat Pirates, and he actually goes on to introduce All Might to them a ton of years later, with him explaining to All Might that this is where he got his powers from. All Might, after hearing about the powers of the Straw Hats and seeing Luffy, would think back to that fateful day when he wiped the floor with him, and All Might would ask if he's totally positive that these guys are to be trusted. Izuku says that they might be crazy, but they are the most trustworthy people you could ever run into. All Might, after, letting his guard down a bit, ends up getting to know the Straw Hats and actually creates a pretty cool bond. Luffy ends up telling All Might that there was no hard feelings and that he just wanted to see how strong he was. And All Might goes on to actually arrange some things with Nezu to give them a place to crash at. The UA dormitory system would be implemented just a little bit sooner for the Straw Hat Pirates, and they would actually be given access to stay there, or if they don't want to, they could stay at one of All Might's mansions. Seeing as he is the #1 hero of Japan, the man probably is loaded. So now we get to a section in time in which Izuku, instead of actually going to Hosu City and deal with the Stain incident or even the Nomu incident, which wouldn't go down, seeing as there would be no real reason for it to. Shigaraki just got broken out of prison, and All for One is not going to be trusting Shigaraki to do his own thing for quite a while. So that never happens. Stain's encounter with Ida would still happen, however, just because of the simple fact that, well, it's just bound to happen. Ida, during this encounter, would actually end up being paralyzed. However, this time around, they have Law and Chopper there to help. And after an intensive surgery performed by Law, he ends up getting right back to health. So during that 1-week internship break that everybody else would have been on, Izuku at that current moment would have been training with the Straw Hat Pirates, and they would essentially be preparing for the final exam, which is going to be happening in about 1 week. They would end up studying for that, and Izuku would be training, getting even more powerful than he already is, with Izuku actually being allowed to be an exception for the UA finals, seeing as Izuku is far too powerful for even All Might himself. Now that All Might realized just how powerful the Straw Hat Pirates are, and that Izuku was almost as powerful as they were the last time they were here. All Might just ends up kind of deciding that maybe it's not the best idea to mess with a kid like that. So essentially Izuku is kind of exempt from the final exams, and we basically get to the day when the forest stuff happens. Luffy and the Straw Hats would basically begin exploring the world, and I don't know how else to put this that isn't as funny as what I have in mind, but basically the Straw Hats end up solving the Overhaul mystery. They end up finding his lair and beating the mess out of Overhaul after finding out what he had done to that little girl. Because here's essentially what happens. The Straw Hats are wandering, Luffy's off by himself, Zoro's lost somewhere, just in like a little random bar or something, drinking people under the table, and Luffy is wandering the streets, right? He sees a boy with a red cape and like glasses or whatever, basically Mirio, and he walks nearby him, and Mirio goes around a corner, Luffy's following, suddenly a girl with white hair or like grayish or whatever color hair Aries is, bumps into him, and Luffy, looking at her and seeing the scars on her body, immediately gets angry. He was not playing no types of games, and as soon as he looked to the direction of Overhaul, Luffy let out his Conqueror's Haki that just knocked him out. He was not waking up from that. Luffy's Conqueror's Haki at this point, with more years of training, the Sun God Nika powers activated. No one is surviving that. No one from the My Hero Academia universe. I don't care what you guys tell me, it's not happening. Overhaul's down. And from here, Luffy goes on to beat the mess out of Overhaul while he's unconscious and tell him that he better heal this girl back to how she is and tell him where his boss is, seeing as he can't be the one, seeing as he's the weakest. Overhaul ends up giving out the location of his base, and the Straw Hats go in there and decimate it completely. It ends up breaking #1 news in Japan, and Izuku just finds out about this after taking the final exam written portion. He facepalms and thinks to himself that yeah, maybe the Straw Hats won't be there for as long as he thought, but Nezu was actually able to clear things up and say that they are actually working with UA and that it was a mission that he asked them to do. They end up getting their provisional hero licenses, and they're now allowed to actually use their powers and strength in public, which me personally, I think they should have never done that. They should have just deadass just kicked the Straw Hats out of there, because now, oh boy, y'all are not ready for what's about to come with Luffy, Zoro, and Law and all that stuff. That said though, essentially what ends up happening eventually is that the forest training arc would happen, which is sadly going to be the final arc that I'm going to be covering for this story. So let's make it last, people. Yep. Go ahead and comment whatever you guys want right now, because like we're literally getting to the last 5 minutes of the story, and I just want to let you guys know that I had a ton of fun recording this one. It started off as a fanfic for the first 25 minutes or so, and the rest of it I ended up taking into my own hands because I didn't enjoy the way that the story went on, and the fact that it didn't even end itself, and the fact that the ship for the original story was a dude. I wasn't letting that slide, so I changed it. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Anyways though, so what ends up basically happening is Izuku during the forest training arc trip would essentially have nothing happen. They're enjoying their time, they're training, the Straw Hats are there. They're there with the UA students, literally helping them train them. They're not giving them their powers, mind you, because I just don't want that to happen. I feel like the Straw Hats probably might do that, but I'm just gonna say for my convenience sake that they don't. Just because I don't want anybody stronger than Izuku in the series, so I'm gonna say that they don't. And eventually the day when All For One decides to send his full-scale attack to capture Bakugo and all that stuff happens, he not only sends the original villains, but even more extra that he got from Tartarus, like Lady Nagan, and more just dangerous and powerful villains overall. They end up arriving, and I'm just going to be stating this in the most simplest terms that I possibly can. They get the floor absolutely wiped with them. It's not even a competition how easy these Straw Hats obliterate All For One. Izuku could have done it by himself by simply using his ability of Room, because all of All For One's abilities essentially would be negated in there. He controls everything. So yeah, Izuku kind of ends up taking out the big bad, and the Straw Hats ended up taking out the other big bad that was left in the series early. So now there is genuinely no more content for me to cover when it comes to what if Deku ate the Ope Ope no Mi. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. If you did, make sure to slap a like button and comment hashtag Ope Ope fruit if you made it this far. And if you're here in the movie version, just know you're an absolute— wait, no, this is the movie version because I didn't keep doing parts. But yeah, if you made it to the end, comment hashtag Ope Ope fruit. And just know, guys, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Zether, and I am out. Peace.